All right, welcome to Witchpolice Radio. I'm here with a familiar face and voice on the podcast. I'm here with Rob Crooks, who was way back in 2013 one of the original co-hosts on the show and has been a guest on the podcast many times over the years. And I guess the reason that we're here now is, first of all, I'm always happy to have you on the show. It's always nice to have you back on here and talk about what you're up to. But you have a brand new record that just came out. To me, suddenly I didn't know it was coming, and suddenly this album just sort of appeared. So I do have a lot of questions about that, and I think that maybe the first thing that we should talk about is, am I right in assuming this was kind of a surprise album? Like, I know you obviously have been working on it for a while, but it just kind of was suddenly there, or did I miss some announcements?
No, I don't know. I didn't. I guess it was a surprise album. I never thought about it like that, but I didn't really like I wasn't planning it like that. I think um it was sort of the reason I made the album is because I had a week off work last December, like the last week.
Yeah.
And I usually have to work during that time, or either that or I'm just like with family all the time. And because it was COVID and I wasn't seeing as much family and I wasn't doing as much, and the week off, I just like I wouldn't say I wrote the whole album in that week, but I basically conceived of it that week, you know. Um, and so it was sort of like a surprise album in the sense of it was just a spontaneous creation, whereas like I have other projects that are more like long term, thought out things that I've planned more. Where this was almost I was almost treating this like a mixtape in that sense. Like I wasn't overthinking it. I was just writing to the beats and recording it. And I think also with putting it out, I kind of have I think like started to rethink putting music out and like how I think you don't have to make everything so precious, like you can just put your music out. And I think that was, I mean, that's maybe seem obvious, but I think for me, that was like a hump I got over.
Okay. Well, it's really interesting you say that about just the way that you sort of approach this, because just as like a full project, it seems incredibly thought out. I mean, just like, I mean, subject matter wise and conceptually, and the fact that you have kind of like an artist statement that came out with the record, sort of explaining, I mean, some of what you just said, but also just the themes behind the record and the reasons for writing these songs and what inspired them and sort of what you hope will come of putting this music out in the world. So maybe that's sort of a good place to go. Is what is the background here? Like, I mean, in addition to obviously just something you did when you had time, that there's clearly an overarching theme and idea, and not even touching the sonic part of it. I mean, subject matter wise, it's very focused, or it seems very focused.
Yeah. It, and I think that's just a product of my thinking being very focused. Like I'm focusing on like maybe very few things and they're all in that album like right now, like that these songs really just came out, um and I think I have a line on one of the songs where it's like, what the fuck do you think about all day long, right? And that's like that's really what I was like thinking of when I wrote that, how like I'm kind of like my mind's always moving with all these different things, with like COVID and with like what's going on in Ukraine, and like um you know like made how people are like choosing to die because they can't find housing,
Yeah, yeah,
and like how much they keep talking about how housing is a right and how they're going to end homelessness, but like they're not doing anything about it, and it's getting worse. Or or what they're doing is kind of disingenuous, and they're really just like giving public money to private developers and you know calling it a solution.
yeah.
So anyways, like just all these things are going on. So I guess that's why it sounds sort of cohesive conceptually, just because like, you know, we had just been through 2 years of COVID or whatever it had been at that time, and these political tensions. Even though I wrote this before like Russia invaded Ukraine, like those tensions had been going on for a while, and obviously the tensions between the U.S. and China, and also Canada and China, and how like stupid Canada's policies is. It's just to like follow the United States. It's really frustrating.
Well, and it seems very timely with when you release it because that's all still in the news. I mean, all of
Yeah.
those topics are still. We're at the anniversary of the what's going on in Ukraine. China is in the news daily now, it seems, and it just it's kind of, I guess, kind of sad that these same issues are still coming up with no apparent solution, and that's why it seems timely. But yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, and I mean, going back to the like first question too, that's another reason why I wanted to just get it out because it was these were sort of like I was talking about like stuff that's in the news, and yeah, it's too bad that it's still um, a thing, but I think it will be for a while. I think it's only going to get worse. It's
Probably,
gonna
yeah,
get. I think it's gonna get better. Like I do have a hopeful view of things. I'm not like super, like I'm not like a doomer or whatever. Like I think the world is actually trending in a better place. Like I think the world is getting better largely because of like you look at the achievements of countries like China and how they like you know eradicated poverty in their country and like you look at what Cuba's doing with like um medicine especially like they're
right.
like developing like they have a lung cancer like treatment now and like ovarian cancer treatment now and it's just like plus all the social um progress that's going on there with like like the new family code and stuff so I do think things are getting better I don't want people to get the wrong impression I'm just like oh everything's so bad and everything's just going to end in a big fireball. That being said, I think in capitalist countries like Canada, I think it's going to get a lot worse before it gets a lot better because, like I said, like the album title, I think we're in a declining empire, or at
Yeah.
least in Canada, we're in the shadow of a declining empire. We're like sort of a semi colony of the empire.
Well, we can't do anything about it just because of our proximity and just we're being inundated by their content on every possible platform. That is, yeah, it's hard to be your own thing when that's
Yeah,
giant things are beside you.
I think though, like this government seems particularly like cozy with United States, not just this government, I shouldn't say. Like the Canadian state over the past like couple decades seems like it's
Right.
getting closer to the United States, and I think it's kind of it's disheartening. It's scary. Like I think that we're starting to see one of the things with the whole China thing and the China balloons, right? Is that it's just like the news is just preparing us for them to like militarize the North, right? Like Canada has never met the quota for military spending that NATO requires of NATO members, but like we're gonna hit that target like sooner than later, I think, for the first time. So we're just going to see more military spending, like shittier conditions for people. So I wrote a rap album about it.
Yeah, it's a very bleak, a very bleak subject matter. But what I like about it, and not saying I like the bleakness of it, because like you said, you do have hope, and I think that comes through at times on the record too. But I
Yeah.
like how you're talking about these obviously much larger issues, like socio-political issues that are affecting the whole world and affecting the country and the continent, and then you're also kind of drilling down on stuff that's happening very very hyper local in Winnipeg. And I mean, even in the samples you're using of the news clips and stuff, you'll have something from something that's happening with China, and then there'll be a clip from from a local news station talking about homelessness. And I think that it makes for a very interesting juxtaposition because this issues are affecting everyone, but it's
Mhm.
especially as someone who works for in local news as a day job. Like that stuff jumped out at me because I've written some of those stories. You know what I mean? And
Yeah.
it's like having those local pegs to it kind of I don't know. It stood out for sure because you're talking about big issues, and those big issues are here too. If that makes sense.
Yeah, totally. Well, I think sometimes people can get caught up in the like abstractness of these big issues, like when you talk about inflation or you talk about the war in Ukraine or
Yeah,
um, like if you are housed, even like people like being unhoused may seem like an abstract thing to you. So I think like you have to think of them in concrete terms. And I guess maybe the easiest way to think of them in concrete terms is to think about how it's affecting, the things around you.
which is looking. You can only do that by looking at it from a hyperlocal lens.
Or it's both, right? It's not either or. You kind of got to keep them both in mind, I guess.
Right. Well, and as far as the, I do want to, I think it's difficult to kind of divorce the subject matter and what you're talking about from the actual music itself. But on the kind of the sonic side of things, one thing that I found really interesting, I was listening to it with headphones on, and this is not a feeling I've got from any of your previous records, and that's not a bad thing about your previous records, but this felt very, I felt very anxious listening to it. Like, and I don't know if that's something you did intentionally, but and I mean more so even from a musical standpoint than from the lyrics and the subject matter. Like the beats sounded very, they stressed me out. Like, and it was a good thing because I'm having an emotional reaction to it. You know what I mean? But it sounded very kind of like almost claustrophobic. But
Right.
I don't know if that's something you did intentionally, but it's very different. I feel like the production is different than what I've heard from you in the past, in the sense that I'm not sure how to explain exactly what it is, but yeah, I felt tense listening to
Right.
the songs.
Huh. That's awesome.
Was that?
Wow.
I mean, did you do anything differently this time around to like when it came to
Well,
the production side?
I guess this is the first time I've like mixed and mastered my own album. So I guess that's what it is, and this is maybe always what I've been going for.
Right.
I think like a lot of the times I like to produce in stereo because I do kind of think like I produce for, well, headphones, but yeah, I guess for headphones or whatever. But often when you like send it to other people to mix or master, they'll like make a lot of things mono because it's sonically better. I don't know. I don't really know how to mix and master. I just do it by ear. So I may
Yeah.
sound like an idiot to people who know it, who know how to do it. Um, but anyways, like that, it always seemed to take out like that stereo dynamic that I always do like in my original mixes. And so maybe that had something to do with it because like I do, that is sort of the what I was going for, especially with like the news clips coming in and out and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Um,
It, it,
I
it
was
is. It's dense. It's like dense audio. Like there's. It's very full. I guess. Like in both ears are full of sound.
Yeah, I think um I used to people used to tell me that it was too much. And I think I used to even try to like take some out for that reason, but I guess I'm just like this album was just so like it kind of felt like being in like a teenager again in the sense that I was just fucking doing it. I was having fun. Had beats, I was rapping, I had stuff to say. And so I guess like I took that same mentality to like producing it. I was just doing what I wanted to do, wasn't thinking about anything else. And of like one of my biggest inspirations too is like Public Enemy, right? So
Bomb Squad. Yeah.
yeah, there's a lot of Bomb Squad influence, and they just had noises going all the time. Like there's no like breaks on a Public Enemy record.
No, and that
Um,
gives you a similar sense of anxiety too, because it's just a barrage, right?
mhm, totally. Yeah, I got asked on a podcast once like why my beats are so fast. Like it was a rap podcast, right? So it was like, what's with all the fast beats? And then like at the time I was kind of just like, yeah, I don't know. I've been hearing that for a long time, but then I was like, it finally like dawned on me, like, because I listened to like BDP and Public Enemy. That's why my beats are fast, because their beats are fast too.
That makes sense. Yeah. Yeah. And like you said a minute ago too, like you're rapping on this record. Not that you haven't rapped on records recently, but you definitely have on the past few. There's been a lot more singing, and they're singing on this as well. But I mean, you're it's not exactly like how you were when you were a teenager, but you're rapping aggressively and you're angry and it's fast and it's dense. Like, were you just kind of, is rap like the better way to get this stuff out?
um well, I guess rap. Yeah.
Sorry, that was like an abrupt end to a question. I felt like I should have added more, but yeah, like, I guess maybe a better way to say it is, I mean, like maybe going with the previous album where you had a lot more singing. It was a lot more introspective, talking about personal stuff. whereas this one is a lot more kind of outside yourself. And you mentioned that in the description that comes with the album as well. Is that
Mhm.
more suited to rap than singing? Like just having that amount of things to say?
Yeah, I guess you do say a lot more when you're rapping, because obviously, because you say the words quicker. um, so yeah, I mean, I guess that it does convey anger. It's easier to convey anger through rapping for me than singing. Like maybe people who could like scream really good, convey a lot of anger that way, but I can't scream. So
Yeah,
maybe rapping is the best way for me to convey anger. Um, and like also, that sort of anxiety too. Like I like how in rap, like I can sort of convey almost like my thought process when I'm feeling really anxious, like that, or like the words are just coming, and they're just like all these maybe stressors or whatever.
yeah, yeah, makes sense. What is the who needs to hear this? Like, who is this record for? Because you obviously have a lot of people who listen to you anyway, who have listened to you for a long time, and I would imagine that many of those people are, if not on board, they already kind of know where you're coming from with a lot of I was going to say politics, but I think that like many years ago, the first interview I did with the member of Propaganda, which was with Chris Hanna in 2014, he didn't say politics, he described it as values. I think that maybe goes applies here too, is that the like I think a lot of people who know your music maybe share some of the values you have as far as the way you're approaching some of these world issues. Who is the record for? Like, do you is there a concern that you're preaching to the choir of people who are maybe already on board with sort of those views?
Well, it's not necessarily in this case bad to like preach to the choir. Like I think it is
Sure.
kind of bad. It's like I think the people need a choir. Um, and what a lot of it comes from that. I wish there was more good like political music in the English language. I find like a lot of it falls short politically or falls short like aesthetically. And there are some like songs that I just like give me shivers, like IRA songs can give me shivers, or like even like a lot of rap too, obviously. Um, and I think I wanted to give like people who think similarly politically, I wanted to give them like an unabashed, like straightforward album that you could get down with and not have to like make sort of compromises about.
Okay.
Because that's what I feel like a lot of the political music I get into or people will introduce me to. It's like, yeah, it's good, but it's like I feel like it's sort of compromised politically, maybe because if you're too radical, you're not going to get so far. But like I think of like someone like Billy Bragg, who I love Billy Bragg's music, and that music gives me shivers sometimes too. But then like Billy Bragg has some like terrible political views. So it's here's a good example. I went back and listened to the Rage Against the Machine song where he just recites the Allen Ginsberg poem.
Yeah, yeah.
And I remember just like loving that song so much, just thinking it was so fucking cool, and like the way like the band would like swell and stuff at these really like uh these high parts, and like Zach De La Roca would be like, and then I went back and listened to it, and it was just like the whole song is just like comparing the Soviet Union and United States as if they're like equally bad, and it's just like fuck that shit. So it was such a downer because I hadn't listened to it in so long, and I was like excited to listen to it again. I was like, that sucks.
Well, that's kind of a problem with so much stuff today too. Is comparing two things where one is arguably like much worse, and then trying to find a way to both sides of it, right? Like I see that way more now than I ever did before. So obviously,
Yeah,
I mean that's obviously been going on for ages, but yeah, it's that would fit today.
yeah, totally. Like, yeah, it's a bummer.
Yeah, it is a bummer. So I guess like I mean, as far as not that your album or you or any me or any of us are gonna be able to solve any of these problems that you're addressing on this record, but I mean, like you said, you have hope. You give examples of these other countries where things are going right, and then we're stuck here, kind of in the shadow of this shitty place that's on the decline. What do you think? Like, what hope do you have for Canada? Like, for us, where we are now, what hope do you have for kind of the future of people? I don't know, solving solving a few of the problems we got.
Well, I mean, I think bottom line is you can't have anything good come out of Canada until there's like land reform, like
Right.
land is given back to indigenous people. So, and that would essentially end Canada, right? So, I think that there's a lot of good reason for, like, I think we're sort of in a constitutional crisis. Like, you look at how the UN has like denounced the doctrine of discovery and the terra nullius stuff, right? So that stuff has no like international legal like merit or whatever. And that's what the whole Canadian Constitution is based on, right? So I think that what the future of what might be a good future of Canada would be like a new constitution where, the different nations that exist within what is now Canada came to the table and wrote a constitution with everybody equal at the, you know, everybody equal.
Yeah. I don't know if that's likely to happen, unfortunately, but just the way things are going now, anyway, it seems like completely unlikely. But
Good.
yeah, I mean, you got to be hopeful, right?
Well, I mean, yeah, you got to be hopeful. And I think you also have to just like look at things historically. I mean, maybe in our lifetime it won't happen, but I think I think things will go that way, I think we'll win.
Yeah. Well, that's a good attitude to have for sure. Do you think that like no, I've known you for a long time. I know you've always had a lot of these views and opinions, and they seem like they've gotten only more vocal. You ran for office in the last election. You've been obviously doing a lot of work within the community and activism. And there's always this like stupid idea that once we get old, I mean, we're 40. Once you get old, you're gonna like just not care anymore. And that whole the idea of being an activist is supposed to be like a young person's thing, right? I mean, it's not clearly, but what do you think is inspiring you to be more kind of vocal about a lot of these topics that you're concerned about at this age, where a lot of people are just settling into like just going with the flow and maybe voting for someone they probably wouldn't have even thought about voting for 20 years ago or whatever. Like, why are you fired up now?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of reasons for it. I think one of the reasons too is just like, I guess at some point, because I was always interested in this stuff, but it was always counterbalanced by this stuff that said it was bad. Like it took me a long time to figure out that people who are respected in our like society, like philosophers and political thinkers, historians, celebrities, whatever, um, they'll seem progressive and they'll seem like left wing, but they'll be like completely anti-socialist or anti-communist, right? And so it's hard to discern that, right? Like you're reading about all these great things Cuba did, maybe, or like when you're younger, you're reading about like, the Chinese Revolution or the like Russian Revolution, and it's inspiring. And you're like, yeah, these are the good guys, right? But then you're also reading like in school, like George Orwell or some shit. So it took me, I should say, like a few years because I was like maybe balancing these two sides because I was really I studied philosophy, right? Like you
Yeah.
want like fuck philosophy is so anti-communist, right? Like so on the one hand I had like Kant, which I was like really into and reading really closely. On the other hand, like you have sort of these like maybe fractured images of what what the world could be like, who are the enemies of like our culture and our state or whatever. And so I think I just when I started to actually just study this stuff, and I started to see how like people like George Orwell are like, you know, fucking whatever. George Orwell's like a anti-communist, let's just say. Um, then you start to realize how you just been lied to your whole life. And so it took me, I guess it took me like longer than it takes some others to realize that. And now I'm fucking mad. And I think like what if you know this stuff, you can't just like not do something about it, I guess, you know?
Well, I think you're right, and I think a lot of people don't though. A lot of people will just say, "Yeah, I know this stuff, but it's not my problem," right? And that's kind of what you said at the beginning of this conversation too.
I
Is
think it,
people will just pass it off.
but I mean, I don't want to like, I don't want to universalize, but I think if I'm speaking for myself, I think there was a point where it was just like, yes, I believed in it, but I didn't believe in the actuality of it. And I think that because in the back of your mind, there's always this idea, oh, like, it's like you get these stories that, oh, the Russian Revolution was a good idea, but it went bad and it turned out bad, or like, you know, China's not communist anymore. It's exploiting people, or like Cuba, the people are revolting against the government or whatever. And you hear all these things, um, and so you always have that in the back of your mind, right? You don't want to commit too much. It's kind of unpopular to commit too much too, right? In this society, so to anything really.
Sure, yeah.
Um, and so I think that it takes sort of study and training and like action to actually realize and believe in the actuality of these things, which I think is the harder part.
Rather than just the idea of like, oh, it's conceptually good, but it's yeah, not
Exactly.
something that's ever gonna be realized.
Yeah, because it's hard to know what's really going on, like in a place like Cuba, for example. You can't just Google
Sure, yeah, no,
things about Cuba, and so you hear about bad things and you're from a distance and you're getting most of your stuff through Canadian like state media or like capitalist media. But so it takes like you have to like hear those bad things and then study why are they happening, study historically, try to have some sort of understanding of economics, try to understand the theory that they're putting into practice, have trust that they're doing it like genuinely, because there's also that like trope from the capitalist world that they're actually just like secret evil people who just want to control people's minds, right? So once you believe that they're actually trying something different, they're actually trying to like organize a society based on something other than profit, and they're doing it, yeah, genuinely, then you can start to look at like, okay, why is this, like, why did they have to do this seemingly repressive thing? Oh, and you understand they had to do it because they're, you know, under constant threat of imperialism or whatever. I mean, I'm just trying to be quick because I see the time is running down now.
well, no, I think what you're talking about too is that a lot of people don't have any, especially now, which is it seems ridiculous because you have so much access to information, but people have very poor media literacy in general, and they like in terms of just even doing the most basic amount of looking into what you're reading and the source of what you're reading and who they're talking to, and that's just like despite having computers at our fingertips that can look up literally anything, I think most people, whatever they're reading, whether it's whatever political angle someone's taking or who's being quoted, they just accept everything on face value they read online, and it's terrifying.
Yeah, well, I think it's like one thing you said that you can literally look up anything, but I don't think that's true. Like
You
like
can look up a lot of things.
you can look up a lot of things, but if you really want to get to like the truth about certain topics, like what's actually going on in China, or what actually happened in, I don't know, the Korean War or something. Like some of these things you can sort of Google, and maybe 1 out of 10 you'll get sort of a sympathetic take on it. But for the most part, like it's really hard to find good information. And sometimes even like stuff that appears progressive is like we'll slip some things in there. CIA, man, they're everywhere.
All right, so this could go on for a while, but we, like you said, I'm cheap and pay for, and I don't have the fancy Zoom. So, what's the best way to find this record right now? I know right now it's just a digital release. You're hoping to put out physical at some point in the future. Where do people find it now?
robcrooks.bandcamp.com.
Is it
And
anywhere else, or is that the only place at the moment?
that's the only place it is. It will be up on streaming when I decide to do that. I'm not in a huge hurry, but it'll be up there, relatively soon. And then sometime after that, I'll probably have physicals.
Cool. And then, what's the best way to find out about what you're doing as far as future releases, future shows, anything else?
Probably at the moment, Instagram at Rob Crooks.
Awesome.